You add the green coffee, so you're adding a cold mass into a hot environment, so the temperature is going to drop, and then you have an equalization point, and then eventually it starts going up. On this machine, there's no temperature gauges, there's no timers, but that happens about 1 minute on this machine. So what'll happen is it'll go green to more of a bright green, and then that bright green will start to yellow out, and that's when we begin the drying phase of the coffee. The drying phase is finished at the first crack, so you'll start to hear it to pop. And that's basically the water exploding out of the cells of the bean. This coffee is 11% moisture by volume, and has quite a dramatic first crack. So you can already see it starts to turn colors. It goes more towards the bright green. You can already see it starts to kind of yellow a little bit. And if you smell it, it smells like that's a bit like freshly cut grass or bread. You pull it out and smell it whenever. I usually tend to let it dry. And now it starts to yellow. It's gonna be hot. It's already over 100 degrees. So you can see that the beans are starting to expand. You have this outer skin, which starts coming off. And we call that chaff. It gets collected down here. So that's the first crack. So this is now, we're in the Maillard reaction, where it starts to brown. And at this stage, you'll start to see the wrinkles start to smooth out. And it'll get a little bit more shiny as the process goes. And then it'll come to what we call the second crack. And that's the CO2 gases from the caramelization of sugars that cause that second crack. The second crack is more soft than the first. You can already see it starts to smooth out, starts to get a little bit more shiny. And now you can hear the second crack. This table, I've tried to select as many strange and unusual coffees that will cover as much of the coffee world as possible in, I don't know, what is it, 9 cups. So we always start from the most mild to the most intense, we'll say. And this is because if we did taste the intense one first, then we're not going to taste anything from the mild one. And in this process, there's no such thing as a wrong answer, because everybody tastes things differently. But the first most important thing is, do I like it? Don't I like it? And then why? So I like it because it's sweet and nutty, but then it's about defining and redefining. So it's nutty, but how is it nutty? Is it like almonds, cashews, walnuts? It's sweet. Is it sweet like toffee, honey, candy, sugar? I don't know. It can be anything. I don't like it. It tastes like burned rubber or moldy or etc., etc. So there's lots of things. Typically when I do this for tasting or quality control purposes, I will do 5 cups to 1 coffee. Each one of these cups has 12 grams of coffee in it, and I put 175 milliliters of 90-degree water. And with this process, it doesn't make that big a difference because every coffee is completely different from the next one. But if I have 10 different Colombias on the table, we have to do everything identically, so that way we can really tell the difference, because sometimes the differences are super minute. Even we've got little tools like this, which is a color meter. So you can kind of see. It gives us a color, a number to the color representation, because the eye, or the human eye, is not developed enough to be able to tell the difference. So these two look really identical, but they're not. There's a 2-point difference. So if I'm tasting, in this case, like I've roasted some a little bit darker, some a little bit lighter, to bring out different aspects of, to make it easier to taste. But if I'm doing a flight of Colombian coffees, then it's really going to make a difference if that coffee is a little bit darker or a little bit lighter. I have to put that in my notes. And everything makes a difference. The color of the cups, the texture of the cups, the lighting, the background noise, everything makes a difference. So this is also why we use white cups, because they're very neutral, and they're not going to influence our taste as much as if we put them into like blue cups like this, because you're already have associations. Or if I play heavy metal while we're tasting, or classical, it's going to make a difference on how you perceive the flavor. So then this is the old color wheel. They've developed a newer one, but I plasticized these, and I figure it's just really for reference. So this helps you to kind of be able to define and redefine. You'll taste some things that will be on there, but you'll taste some things that potentially aren't on there. Yeah, there's a newer version of this, but I think that this one's a little bit more clear for beginners. Yep. So the first thing that we do is we're going to go through these like one by one individually, and first thing we do is analyze the aroma. Pour the water for the... So what happens now is the coffee forms a crust on top, and then we let it sit for 4 minutes so that way it can brew. And the crust locks in the aroma. So this bowl is to rinse your spoons in between the cups so you don't cross-contaminate. The small one is for when we break the crust. So this first one is from Colombia. It's a fully washed coffee. And this is a fully washed. This one sits in what we call parchment, or pergamino, which is the farmers sometimes leave it in this casing before they ship, because it kind of protects it, and then the coffee bean sits right inside. So fully washed tend to be the most clean. So they what we consider to be clean. They harvest the cherries, and then they physically separate the beans from the cherries with a special machine called a pulper. And then they put it into fermentation tanks for 12 to 48 hours, or depending on kind of what they want to do. And then they physically scrub it afterwards, and this removes a lot of the defects from the assortment. And then they physically put it on drying beds until it's reached its optimal dryness. And okay. So these are really clean and predictable. So typically when I have 5 cups to 1 coffee, most of the cups will always be the same. As we get kind of more towards the naturals, you get a little bit more differentiation. When the 4 minutes is up, we're going to do what we call breaking the crust. And we take 1 single spoon and press the coffee away from your nose. This causes all the aroma to spill into your nose. You have 1 chance to get it. If you miss it, you miss it. So I always tell people for the first one, already be inhaling through your nose before you break the crust. This way you be sure to get it. And if not, then you've got plenty of time for practice to get it right. The first one's always the hardest. And yeah, we gotta wait another minute. All these are roasted pretty light, and that way we can find out, see everything that the coffee has to offer. The darker we roast it, the more things get roasted off. So the final one, as you can see, is much darker than all the rest. That one's a mystery coffee. It's one of these, but I've roasted it much darker. And we'll see if you can guess. Yep, we can go ahead and break. Just like that. Now you can see there's foam and floaters on the top. That's why you have 2 spoons to clean the cup. And I always find it's best just to keep the stem of the spoon on the side, and you just follow it around. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but we don't want any coffee particles float like in our mouth. Next step is we fill the spoon, and we just like tasting hot soup. So we want to think about things like the flavor, the acidity, the aftertaste, if it's in balance or not, just basically whatever you can kind of think of. The texture, the mouthfeel, creamy texture in the beginning, but that kind of finishes out to a bit of a oaky. It's quite nice and accessible, but it's also one of the most mild ones. The next one is also from Colombia. It's even from the same growing region, but it's from a different mountain, different. With Arabica, Arabicas tend to be like the wine, so it makes a difference which part of the mountain, how much sun, how much rain, the mood of the person picking the coffee. Everything will make a difference with the Arabicas. Whereas with Robustas, and we do have 2 Robustas here on the table, they're kind of low grown, and it doesn't really matter where in the world they're grown. They all kind of more or less taste the same. But I have a low quality Robusta and I have a high quality Robusta, so then you can kind of see a little bit the difference in taste. So if you smell this one, maybe you can kind of see that there's a little bit of a difference in the aroma. Perfect, yeah. In Brazil is sun-dried natural, so it's another word for like semi-washed. Basically, and it varies from region to region and what kind of semi-washed it is. It can be called like pulp natural, sun-dried natural, honey processed. I don't have a specific example of the Brazil, but as a little bit of an example of what semi-washed is, this is a honey process. So again, it's in the parchment again, but with honey process, they have a special pulper that they can program how much of the cherry is left on the bean. So this one's called black honey because, of course, that looks like it's coated in black honey, and that's the black coloration is from the cherry. So these tend to be a little bit more sweeter, a little bit more wild, and a little bit more closer to naturally processed coffees. So they tend to be a little bit heavier, thicker bodied, sweeter on the sweeter mouthfeel. Typically, if I'm doing a tasting, I always do things the same way. So I'll roast the coffees the day before and I'll taste them 24 hours later. So that way they've had 24 hours of resting time. So if the crust does collapse, it could be due to extra CO2 and it hasn't degassed enough. And that's just maybe a physical characteristic of that coffee, but I still make a note of it. Something. If it does it, then it's something non-standard, and then you either have to, if the coffee tastes good, then you have to go into why that coffee's have collapsed, and I would call it cacao structure. So awesome. A lot of people don't understand what I mean when I say cacao structure. So this is a cacao bean, and the easiest way to do is to take one of your spoons and just take the back of it and crack it. Like so. And then you put it in the palm of your hand and you rub it until it heats up a little bit. And then you smell the aroma. This is a Piero Blanco from Peru cacao bean. So it's a very high acidic cacao bean. But we're not looking at the acidity. We're looking at the kind of structure, the way it feels in your mouth or in your nose. The next one comes from Ethiopia. It's a naturally processed. So when we talk about naturally processed, this is naturally processed. So they allow the cherries to dry on the beans, and that way all the fruity juices go into the beans. So you get kind of more wilder, funky flavors, stronger bodies, sometimes winey notes. It's really you can sometimes get blueberries or strawberries, or like the naturals I find to be a lot more exotic, and I like them because of that. However, naturals are also traditionally done in drier climates where washed coffees and semi-washed coffees tend to be a little bit more water intense than naturals. So they were making naturals in places where water was in short supply and just a drier climate, because you're basically in a tropical climate and you're trying to dry this fruity flesh that's full of sugars, and you don't want mold to grow on it. So it's a very labor intense product, and especially like now in like Costa Rica or a lot of other countries that are traditionally have not done naturals are now doing naturals, and that just makes them more expensive than the washed ones. So this one's from Ethiopia, from a growing region called Limu. It's a semi-direct trade, so I bought it from an importer that has really good relations with the farmers, and I know that the farmers are being paid well for their labors. And Ethiopia is the birthplace of coffee. So it has the most regional varieties of flavor than anywhere else. Typically, like with Colombia or Brazil, they're going to be able to tell you what varietal it is. Whereas with Ethiopia, they just say heirloom, because there's so many different wild varieties of coffee Arabica there that they've not been classified 100%. I could do with it. Like I could pick it apart by hand one by one, but it will take me ages to get enough to sample. But a lot of times now what they're doing is creating what they call cascara, which is the cherries of the beans that they make into a tea. And it becomes like a very fruity, kind of almost rooibos flavor. Just part of the principles of the coffee. Like I roasted these last night, but it hasn't degassed enough, so the crust just collapsed because it was too gassy. This is usually why I wait 24 hours. Also, your Ethiopias in the roaster, they tend to have their really strong first crack. It sounds like popcorn almost. Shame. I would describe this one like a little bit like a soft Fruit Loops, like the children's cereal that's super sugary. Maybe that's how I would describe this one. It's like it's a bit Fruit Loops, but it's like green tea structured. That's kind of how it feels on your mouth. It's got a little bit of like tangerine zest in its finish. Yeah. It's very sweet, still very accessible, but you can kind of see how that fruitiness then goes into the beans in compared to the washed and the semi-washed. The next one's from Yemen. It's also a natural, in Ethiopia in Yemen they really have extreme water constraints, so they take great care in the watering of their coffee plants. They've got a lot of hydro-stabilization methods. And historically, Ethiopia is the birthplace of coffee, but Yemen is the first country that was trading it. So it first gained popularity in Ethiopia, but then it spread to the Arab world, and especially with the Muslims, they can't drink alcohol, so they would drink a lot of tea, but then coffee kind of was also an acceptable consumable substance based on their religious guidelines. And then eventually when the European traders were passing through the port of Al-Mocha in Yemen, that's when the Europeans discovered the coffee, and that's why a lot of times coffees have the name mocha, because it's associated with the port more than it is a flavor. And it's another different level. Hopefully not. So it's completely different. A bit like a dark chocolate bonbon with a little bit of a cognac filling. That's how I would describe this. Relatively creamy in the beginning, but then it has a dry finish. Overall quite sweet. Yeah. So as you go back through them, you'll notice they've cooled off. And when the coffee's cooled off, the molecules aren't moving as fast, so those flavor elements are sometimes easier to see. And if it's not good cold, it's not good coffee. Sometimes the coffee tastes just fine all the way up, and then you taste it cold, and then you get an extreme ferment from the cup, and it's an immediate rejection, where you didn't have any indication of that over ferment when it was warm or in the aroma or anything. It's quite funny. So that's why when you buy cheap coffee and you let it get cold on the counter, it just tastes like ass. That's because it's not very good coffee to begin with. The next two are Robustas. First one is Tanzania Robusta. It's a kind of a commodities grade Robusta. And if you smell it, to me it smells like burned rubber bands. It's not ideal. And Typically or traditionally, Robusta has always been used as a cheap filler in coffee. So Arabica has to be fresh to be able to pull a good crema from an espresso machine. But if you add a little bit of Robusta, that coffee can then be 2 years old, and you'll still get a good crema from it. And traditionally, Robusta prices have been half that of Arabica. So the farmers really do not care. They just throw every old shit into their coffee, and you kind of wind up with this, I don't know, burned rubber band kind of aroma. And it's really clear to taste. We need to have like Illy, Segafredo, any of these kind of like bulk Italian brands. They all have a little bit of Robusta in it, and that could be anywhere from 10% to 50%. It just depends on what they're doing with it. The second one is a Robusta out of Peru. It's priced equal to Arabicas, and these farmers also have an Arabica farm, so they treat it the same way that they would treat an Arabica. So it's a very fine quality, it's a gourmet quality Robusta. And I've secretly fed it 100% to coffee people and not told them what it was until afterwards, until they guessed what it was. And nobody guessed that it was a Robusta, so it was quite a fun activity. So burn rubber, kind of or describe this like a green walnut. So as you're separating the walnut from its fruit, it kind of got that kind of tannin, green, chlorophyll-y sensation, like a walnut, an undried walnut. People don't usually get to taste Robustas by themselves, so this is always fun to throw these on the table. And you go to a cafe that serves cheap coffee and you go, oh yeah, I can taste the nasty, cheap Robusta in this coffee. You can see it's got a lot more gas bubbles in it. Oh, it's gonna be so yummy. That's good. So that was the commodity grade Robusta, and now this is the gourmet grade Robusta. Now with this one, these farmers also have a Arabica farm, and we suspect that there might be a little bit of hybridization going on. Arabica will not take the pollen from Robusta, but Robusta will take the pollen from Arabica. And so we kind of suspect there's a little bit of a hybridization going on, like a Robusta mother, but and there's also a lot of experimentation that's happening with Robusta and this hybridizations with climate change and all the other challenges facing the industry. And Robusta, as you know, it's as its name suggests, it's pretty robust. It's pretty resistant against molds and other funguses. It's pretty resistant against coffee pests. And I could grow a Robusta plant here in the Netherlands, and it will eventually make a couple cherries. Whereas an Arabica, it'll grow here, but it'll never fruit. I'd much rather drink that one than the commodity one. Let's see, a little taste of ass. Versus the high quality. Yep, I prefer that one. And with Monsoon coffees, they tried to emulate how the coffees would have tasted back in the days of the sailing ships. So they kind of purposely ferment it and then re-dry it, and it creates quite a unique cup profile. But there is a reason why it's at the end of the list instead of the beginning. And you're about to find out why. Adventures and funky flavors. Cheerios. Ferment. This is the mystery coffee. So it's one of these first 8 that's just roasted darker. And when I roast, I tend to roast for the brewing method. So all of these are quite light. But if I were to put them on the espresso machine, they'd be very astringent. Whereas this one is roasted very dark for this method. Whereas this one will be more tasty on an espresso machine. But it will taste a bit like Roadworks. A bit tarry, smoky, a bit rough on a cupping table. Now this one also, because it's roasted darker, the coffee is going to be more buoyant. So it will have a lot more floaters on top than the previous coffees. Extra foam on top. Oh yeah. That was a cheap Robusta. 1/8 of a chance to get it right. If that was a lottery, I'd put all my money out. I'd just vote on it. It's difficult. You're close. It's actually the Brazil. The third one. So you can tell by the texture, as they have the same texture. The flavor's completely different though. Like that, it's in the mouthfeel. So in the texture. It's that kind of cacao structure again. And they match. Whereas if you try this one on the espresso machine, it's going to be much more espresso. It'll taste way better in an espresso machine than any of these will. Whereas on this table, this is the worst tasting one. Yeah, well, okay. The cheap Robusta is the worst tasting one, but this is the roughest Arabica. This limo is very soft in comparison to some other naturals. Sometimes you get like complete crazy red fruit, raspberries and strawberries and cherries, just super bold, almost like candy in your face. Ooh, how many coffees do I drink per day? Depends on the day. So typically I'll have about 8 shots of espresso throughout the day, just as my normal consumption.